To mark the 30th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the first of a two-part series looking back at the seismic events that led to the fall of the Shah. Now on BBC World News, how the West and the Shah himself underestimated the power of religion in Iran.
The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, ruled Iran from September 1941 to February 1979. From the start, he was determined to transform his impoverished and feudal country into a modern industrialized nation. To BBC documentary makers who tracked most of his reign, he made a fascinating subject.
When you talk about your mission for your country, what exactly do you mean?
To bring our country within the limits of its possibility, natural-wise, population-wise, our intelligence, our sturdiness, our diligence, our vitality, our manlyhood, to its optimum capabilities and possibilities.
He was seen as regal, autocratic, and overambitious. But the BBC, his ally America, and even the Shah himself were slow to spot the forces that would prove to be his real undoing.
I am in contact with my people. I go places and I talk to the people. And I can claim to have the pulse of my people really in my hand.
The Islamic Revolution toppled the Shah and brought Ayatollah Khomeinis to power in 1979. It was the first religious revolution in modern history and the first televised revolution ever.
There's no mistaking what this, in fact, really is. It's a massive voice of protest against the rule of the Shah.
Day after day, the world woke up to images of Ayatollah Khomeini defying the Shah and the Americans. For the first time, the world witnessed the power of political Islam to change societies.
The political initiative now lies totally with the Ayatollah. Now that he's back, he'll very soon announce the establishment of a government of his own.
This is a tale of two men. One whose delusions overshadowed his ambitions, and one who never gave up his vision to establish an Islamic state. The first time BBC television filmed the Shah was in 1948. The 27-year-old king was visiting a military base in southern England.
The main object of his visit is to study our scientific and industrial technique, to see what contribution they can make to the life and well-being of his own people.
The Shah had, since he was a young man, had a fascination with things military. He wanted the very best, the most sophisticated equipment, and he was sure he could create a kind of modern force in Iran. He had no self-doubts about that enterprise.
While the Shah smiled throughout his visit, he later told the BBC that he had been deeply angered by the behavior of the British towards his father, Reza Shah, and his country.
In 1941, shortly after Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, British and Russian forces entered Iran against only token resistance by the Iranian army, after warning Reza Shah about his links with the Germans. The old Shah abruptly abdicated and went into exile. His 21-year-old son was faced with the formidable task of taking over a country suffering from the shock and humiliation of a foreign invasion.
What I reproach eventually my father is not to have been mine the oil fields and tell you that if you come, I'm going to blow up everything. But the worst was what happened next, that the occupation of the country led to so many evil, fifth columns and the reapparition of the feudal chieftains, also a very reactionary power of the clergy or the mullahs.
The first real threat to the Shah's power came in the early 1950s. A new Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, had won huge public support by taking Iranian oil back into government ownership and ending the 40-year monopoly enjoyed by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Mossadegh then set his sights on the Shah. He wanted to curb his power and turn him into a constitutional monarch, a titular head of state. In August 1953, the Shah left for a holiday in Italy, believing that Mossadegh was about to force him to abdicate. But Mossadegh had miscalculated. This was the 50s and the height of the Cold War. America, fearing that Mossadegh was too close or too tolerant of a small but burgeoning communist movement in Iran, had already decided to act. 3 days after the Shah had left Iran, a military coup backed and orchestrated by the CIA removed Mossadegh from power. The Shah returned the following day.
اگر بگوییم که 28 مرداد و چند ماهی پس از اون شاه باز در اوج محبوبیت بود که بود، برای اینکه مردم فکر می‌کردن که وجود او سبب شده است که خطر حزب توده و کمونیست‌ها از بین برود، برطرف بشود، ولی با سیاست‌هاش، با مداخلاتش در امور روزانه کشور، در خرابکاریش در کار دولت و این کاری بود که همیشه می‌کرد، به سرعت این قبول عام از بین رفت.
اما کودتا یک تأثیر دیگری هم در داخل ایران داشت و اون عبارت از این بود که نظام پادشاهی رو آخرین رگه ها یا آخرین چیزهای مشروعیتش از بین برد. برای اینکه در نظام پادشاهی ایران حتی در دوران‌های باستانی این رسم بود که هرگاه پادشاهی به دلیل مخالفت مردمش از کشورش فرار میکرد، میرفت و بعد به کمک یک ارتش دیگری میآمد حکومت رو به دست میگرفت، اون پادشاه دیگه مشروعیت نداشت برای اینکه دیگه از دست ملتش رفته دوباره برگشته، اونم با یک دولت کمک یک دولت اجنبی.
Back on the throne, the Shah consolidated his power. Parliament's wings were clipped and he became, in effect, an absolute monarch.
These were his army chiefs. It was these generals who backed him in his struggle against Mossadegh in 1953. Today, the Shah depends on the army above all for his personal security, the continued ability to do his job, and even perhaps to remain on his throne. Unlike his father, Reza, who started life as a Russian army corporal, the Shah is no soldier. His officers do a good bit of feuding among themselves, which has helped him to stop any one of them from gaining too much power. But he's careful to keep them happy by giving them lavish funds, mostly from American aid.
The Shah returned to Britain in 1955. While he went shopping for military equipment, Queen Soraya, his then wife, was presented with the latest in British fashion. The Shah was now intent on turning Iran into a military superpower. In the 1950s, Iran's northern neighbor, the Soviet Union, was expanding its influence in the Middle East. Britain and the United States saw the Shah as a useful ally in their battle against Soviet expansion. Thousands of American military and civilian advisors started to work in Iran. With them came a large and steady flow of dollars. In the late 1950s, American military and economic aid amounted to 22% of the Iranian government's spending. Yet the Shah didn't rely on the Americans to protect Iran's borders from the Soviet Union. In a bold move, he struck a deal with the Russians.
شاه موفق شد با یک دیپلماسی بسیار درخشان روس‌ها را آرام بکند و اطمینان بدهد که با اینکه ایران در سنتو بود و در واقع جزء کمربند دفاعی امریکا، یعنی عملاً و رسما حتی منتها تعهد کرد که هرگز پایگاه نظامی به امریکایی‌ها ندهد.
By this time, the Shah had divorced Queen Soraya, who had not managed to provide him with an heir. A few months later, he married Farah Diba, an architecture student.
خیلی راحت منو گذاشتن. میدونی یه کسی نبود که آدم مثلا وحشت کنه باش صحبت بکنه. از این طرفی هم خود من یه آدمی بودم که نمیدونم همون آدمی بودم که همیشه بودم و هستم. حتی اتفاقا یادم میاد راجع به موضوع یه دفعه خب بعد از چند سال ازت پرسیدم که چطور شد شما منو انتخاب کردی. بعد گفت من از سادگیت خوشم آمد و این خب برای من خیلی باعث خوشحالی بود.